At my sister's wedding, she deliberately seated me at the singles table, her eyes gleaming with cruelty as she waited for me to break. I refused to give her the satisfaction. Then, just as I braced myself for a long, humiliating night, a striking stranger slid into the seat beside me, unaware that his next move would turn her flawless celebration upside down. My sister, Vanessa, didn't just plan her wedding, she weaponized it. The crystal chandeliers of the ballroom weren't just for light, they were spotlights for my public humiliation. The white roses on every table weren't just decoration, they were pristine, perfect witnesses to my perceived inadequacy. And table 12, tucked away in the far, forgotten corner of the room, wasn't just for singles. It was my sister's final, perfect act of psychological warfare, and I was her only target. Our entire lives had been a dress rehearsal for this moment. Growing up in our quiet, suburban New Jersey home, Vanessa was the sun, and I was her shadow. She was the one with the effortless grace, the quick wit, the cascade of blonde hair that earned her the lead in every school play. I was the quiet one, the bookish one, the little sister who was always just a bit too serious, a bit too plain. Vanessa's favorite pastime was pointing this out, always with a sweet, cutting smile that made it impossible to fight back. "Oh, Em, that dress is so comfortable," she'd say, her eyes scanning my prom dress with pity. "It's brave of you to wear it." Before the wedding, I had a conversation with my mother that felt like a premonition. "Just let her have her day, Emily," Mom had said, fussing with the hem of my maid of honor dress. "You know how she gets. Just smile and try not to cause any trouble." The implication was clear. Vanessa's comfort was the priority. My feelings were an inconvenience. I was not to be a person. I was to be a prop in Vanessa's perfect day. And so, I walked into that glittering ballroom, my smile a carefully constructed mask. I had barely stepped through the door when she intercepted me, a vision in white lace and smug satisfaction. "Emily, darling," she said, her voice dripping with false innocence, "I have a special spot for you. Table 12. She gestured toward the shadowed corner, right next to the service entrance. I felt the blood drain from my face. Table 12. The island of misfit toys, as our cousins jokingly called it. It was where you put the twice-divorced great-uncle, the awkward teenage cousin who only spoke to his phone, and, apparently, the bride's 30-year-old unmarried sister. It was a public branding, a declaration to our entire extended family that I was, once again, falling short. "Oh," I said, my voice miraculously steady. "How thoughtful." Her smile sharpened. "I just wanted you to have some peace and quiet," she cooed, but the flicker of triumph in her eyes was unmistakable. I swallowed my pride, a familiar, bitter taste. I would not let her see me flinch. I would not give her the satisfaction of tears. I held my head high as I made the long walk of shame across the glittering floor. Whispers brushed against my ears like spider silk. My aunts shot me pitying glances that felt like tiny daggers. A few cousins smirked, enjoying the spectacle. My chair, predictably, was at the very edge of the room, half banished, half displayed for everyone's entertainment. When I sat down, my fingers trembled as I adjusted the napkin on my lap. The loneliness was a physical presence, cold and heavy. I was surrounded by 100 people I'd known my whole life, yet I had never felt more alone. Vanessa passed by just then, her new husband, a blandly handsome man named Mark, in tow. She leaned down, her veil brushing my shoulder, her breath smelling of champagne and victory. "Try not to cry into your soup, Em," she whispered, her eyes glinting. I forced a smile, biting down on my tongue until the metallic taste of blood anchored me in the moment. I would not cry. I would sit here with perfect posture, smile serenely, and radiate an unbothered calm that would drive her insane. I would survive this, just as I had survived every other casual cruelty she had inflicted over the years. I would be the perfect, uncomplaining prop. Just as my humiliation seemed absolute, a quiet scrape of a chair beside me broke the spell. I turned, my stomach twisting, expecting some distant, socially awkward relative sent to keep me company out of pity. Or worse, my mother's attempt at matchmaking with some twice-divorced accountant. Instead, a man in a perfectly tailored dark navy suit sat down. His hair was a warm chestnut brown, slightly tousled, as if he'd just run his hand through it. His jaw was sharp, his shoulders broad, and his smile was a disarming mixture of warmth and genuine curiosity. He looked completely, effortlessly, out of place at the table of outcasts. "James Carter," he said, his voice a low, calm melody that cut through the ballroom's din. He extended his hand, his confidence so natural it felt like a force of nature. He carried himself with the easy assurance of a man who belonged anywhere he chose to be, even at the margins of a wedding. I blinked, startled out of my carefully constructed misery. "Emily Reed," I managed, my voice a little breathless as I shook his hand. His grip was firm and warm. He studied me for a moment, his gaze direct and intelligent. Then he glanced toward the head table where Vanessa was stealing smug glances in our direction. His expression shifted subtly, the polite curiosity replaced by a shrewd, knowing assessment. Something like mischief sparked in his deep-set eyes. He had read the entire room, the entire pathetic drama, in a single sweeping gaping glance. He leaned in, just close enough that his words were a private conspiracy between us. "Table 12, huh?" he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. "Is this where they put the interesting people, or the ones who know all the family secrets?" A surprised laugh bubbled up in my chest, a sound I hadn't expected to make all night. "A little of both, I think," I whispered back. His grin widened. He looked back at Vanessa, who was now frowning in our direction, her perfect script momentarily disrupted. "Don't worry," James said quietly, his gaze returning to mine. "I have a feeling tonight is about to get a lot more interesting." And with those words, a spark of something I hadn't felt in years, hope maybe, or perhaps just the thrill of a shared rebellion, ignited within me. I had no idea who this man was, or why he had been exiled to my table. But as he sat beside me, a sudden, unexpected ally in my sister's war, I realized my role as the perfect silent prop was officially over. The show was about to begin. James didn't waste a moment. He didn't fill the space with the awkward, obligatory small talk that usually populated table 12. He bypassed the predictable, "So how do you know the bride and groom?" and instead looked at me with genuine interest. "Emily Reed," he said, as if tasting the name. "You're a teacher, right? I think I overheard someone mention it." I was taken aback. He had been listening. "Yes, second grade," I replied. "How did you—" "I pay attention," he said simply, a subtle smile playing on his lips. "It's a useful skill in my line of work." He was an architect, he explained, based in Chicago. He was a friend of the groom, Mark, from college, and had flown in just for the wedding. "Mark told me I was at the fun table," he added, his eyes twinkling. I'm beginning to think he was right. For the first time all night, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. I found myself forgetting the calculated cruelty of Vanessa's seating chart. I forgot the pitying glances and the smug smirks. In the small, intimate bubble of our conversation, the rest of the ballroom seemed to fade away. But Vanessa hadn't forgotten. From across the room, her gaze was a physical weight. I could feel it on the back of my neck. Every time James leaned in to tell a story, every time a laugh escaped my lips, her perfectly painted smile would tighten just a fraction. "Is it just me?" James murmured, leaning closer under the guise of refilling my champagne flute. "Or does the bride look like she's trying to telepathically set me on fire?" I choked on my sip of champagne, a sudden burst of laughter I couldn't contain. "You noticed?" "Oh, I noticed," he said, his grin widening. "Which brings me to a proposal. I don't know what I've walked into here, but it feels like a very well-produced play, and you've been cast in a rather unfortunate role." I blinked at him, unsure where he was going. "Play along?" He leaned in conspiratorially, his voice a low, thrilling whisper. "Let's give them a different show. Let's pretend we're something, not a full-blown romance, nothing that screams desperation, just a connection, something that suggests this isn't your first time meeting a fascinating, handsome stranger at a wedding." The self-deprecating humor in his tone was irresistible. "Just for tonight, a temporary alliance. What do you say, Emily Reed? Care to cause a little elegant chaos?" My first instinct, the well-trained instinct of the good little sister, was to protest. It was her wedding day. It was petty. It was a high school revenge plot. But then I caught Vanessa's gaze again. She was looking at me, her head tilted, that familiar, satisfied smirk on her face. She was still expecting me to sit here and crumble, nursing a broken ego and a glass of flat champagne. And something in me, something I thought had been extinguished years ago, snapped. I remembered my last serious relationship, a man named Ben who had been charmed by Vanessa at a family dinner, and who later admitted he found my quiet nature a little boring compared to her sparkle. I remembered her helpful advice after the breakup. "Maybe you should try being a bit more fun, Em. No man wants a librarian." I looked back at James, at the intelligent mischief in his eyes, at the unspoken offer of partnership. This wasn't just a game. It was an act of self-preservation. "Fine," I whispered, a jolt of adrenaline shooting through me. "Let's do it." The transformation was immediate, though subtle. James draped his arm lightly along the back of my chair, his fingers occasionally brushing my shoulder. When we spoke, he leaned in, our heads close together. He had a way of holding my gaze that made it feel like I was the only person in the room. I played my part, emboldened by his confidence. I laughed softly at his jokes, my hand briefly touching his arm. I tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, my eyes meeting his over the rim of my glass, a second longer than necessary. It worked like wildfire. The whispers around the room shifted their tone. My aunt's pitying glances morphed into raised eyebrows of intrigued speculation. My cousins, who had been smirking, now exchanged curious, confused looks. And Vanessa, my flawless, in-control sister, the director of this entire production, was visibly unraveling. During the speeches, I could feel her stare burning into me. When I turned, she looked away too quickly, her smile plastered on, but brittle at the edges. She was losing control of her narrative, and she hated it. The charade was exhilarating. But as the night wore on, something strange began to happen. The lines between pretend and real started to blur. James wasn't just a convincing actor, he was an incredible listener. He asked about my second graders, his eyes lighting up when I told him about the ridiculous, wonderful things they said. He asked about my dream of backpacking through Europe, not with the dismissive air of an adventurous dangerous man judging a safe woman, but with genuine curiosity about where I would go first. Florence, I admitted, a dream I rarely spoke aloud. For the art. Ah, the Uffizi, he said with a nod of understanding. You have to go early, before the crowds, and there's a little trattoria near the Ponte Vecchio that serves the best cacio e pepe you'll ever have. I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't with anyone in years. I told him about the loneliness I rarely admitted, the feeling of being perpetually on the outside looking in, even within my own family. I didn't mean to, the words just came out. He didn't offer pity or platitudes, he just listened, his expression thoughtful. It sounds like you've spent a lot of time making yourself small to make other people feel big, he said quietly. His observation was so accurate, so incisive, it left me breathless. He saw me. In the space of 2 hours, this stranger at the singles table saw me more clearly than my own family had in 30 years. As the band struck up a faster tune, the dance floor filled. James stood, offering his hand. Shall we? I hesitated for a split second, my old anxieties flaring up. I wasn't a natural dancer. Vanessa was. I had a vivid memory of our high school prom, where she had effortlessly twirled around the dance floor while I stood awkwardly by the punch bowl. But then, I looked at James's outstretched hand and at the steady, reassuring smile on his face. I smiled back and took his hand. I'd love to. The moment we stepped onto the floor, the energy of the room seemed to shift and focus on us. But for the first time that evening, it wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was just about us. The music swelled, a classic Frank Sinatra tune, and James pulled me closer, his hand firm and warm at the small of my back. He guided me with a surprising, effortless grace, leading me through the steps as if we'd been dancing together for years. I wasn't Vanessa's awkward little sister anymore. I wasn't the family's resident late bloomer. I was just a woman, dancing with a man who made her feel seen, and it was intoxicating. We were lost in the music, in the surprising ease of our movements, when a shadow fell over us. Vanessa. She had marched across the dance floor, her new husband trailing behind her like an afterthought, her wedding veil a billowing storm cloud. Emily, she said, her voice tight, the smile on her face a grotesque, fixed thing for the benefit of the watching crowd. May I have a word? I stiffened in James's arms, the magical bubble popping. This was it, the public reprimand. But James, sensing my tension, gave my hand a subtle, reassuring squeeze. It was a small gesture, but it was enough. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone at the edge of the room anymore. Of course, I said, my voice cool and even. I gave James a small, apologetic smile and followed my sister to a secluded alcove near the bar. The moment we were out of earshot, her mask of bridal bliss dissolved into pure, unadulterated fury. What in the world do you think you're doing? She hissed, her eyes blazing. I allowed myself a moment of innocent confusion. Dancing? I asked, tilting my head. I thought that was customary at weddings. Don't play dumb with me, Emily. It doesn't suit you. She gestured furiously back toward the dance floor. Who is he? Did you bring him here just to ruin my night? I knew you'd try to pull something like this to make it all about you. The accusation was so classic, Vanessa, twisting my supposed existence into a deliberate attack on hers, that I almost laughed. Years of swallowed words, of biting my tongue until it bled, rose in my throat. All the times she had borrowed a favorite sweater and returned it stained. The time she'd told my high school crush that I had a weird obsession with collecting stamps. The endless, subtle cruelties disguised as sisterly teasing. And suddenly, looking at her fuming, beautiful face, I wasn't afraid anymore. Actually, Vanessa, I said, my voice calm and measured, I didn't bring him. He sat down beside me, at table 12. You're the one who put him there. Her eyes narrowed. This is my wedding day, my perfect day, and you will not turn it into one of your pathetic little dramas. I didn't make it about me, Vanessa, I said, the truth feeling powerful on my tongue. You did. You set that table. You sent me to that corner. You whispered that nasty little comment in my ear. You scripted a tragedy for me, hoping I'd sit there looking pathetic and alone. But the script had a plot twist you didn't write. I met someone. That's not sabotage, darling. It's irony. Her face flushed a blotchy, ugly red. For a moment, I thought she might actually scream, but she was trapped. She was the star of this show, and the star couldn't have a meltdown in front of her adoring audience. So she did what she always did. She gathered the tattered remnants of her composure, straightened her spine, and shot me a look of pure venom. You will regret this, she whispered, before turning on her heel and gliding back to her husband, her smile once again plastered firmly in place. When I returned to James, he was waiting with 2 fresh glasses of champagne. He handed one to me, his eyebrow raised in a silent question. Everything all right? I took a long, slow sip, the bubbles a celebratory fizz on my tongue. The tension that had been a permanent resident in my shoulders for years was gone. I felt light. Better than ever, I said, and I meant it. The rest of the night passed in a soft, dreamlike blur. The game was over, but the connection it had sparked was undeniably real. James and I talked for hours, retreating back to our corner table, which now felt less like an exile and more like our own private island. The conversation flowed with an ease I had only ever read about in novels. He told me about growing up in Chicago, about his passion for design designing public spaces, parks, and libraries that brought people together. He told me about his disastrous attempt to bake sourdough during the pandemic, which ended with him setting off his smoke alarm and having to be rescued by the fire department. He was funny, self-deprecating, and incredibly smart. I found myself opening up too. I told him about my second graders, about the hilarious and profound things they said. I told him about my dream of seeing the art in Florence, a dream I had kept tucked away like a secret. I even told him about the loneliness, the quiet ache of feeling like you're always on the outside looking in. He listened, his gaze never leaving my face. You know, he said thoughtfully, sometimes the most interesting people are the ones sitting at the edges of the room. They're the ones who are actually paying attention. By the time the band played its last song, the ballroom was scattered with empty glasses, wilting roses, and the happy exhaustion of a successful party. Vanessa, still radiant in her gown, but with a brittle edge to her smile, pointedly ignored us as she and Mark made their grand exit, swept away in a shower of rice and well-wishes. For once, her disapproval felt like a distant, irrelevant noise. Outside, the cool night air was a welcome balm. James walked me to my car, our footsteps echoing in the quiet parking lot. I know tonight started strangely, he said, turning to me, and I'll admit our alliance was fun. But underneath the game, Emily, I had a really wonderful time, and I would really like to see you again, without any wedding drama or scheming sisters involved. My heart, which had been doing a steady, happy rhythm, gave a sudden, hopeful skip. I'd like that too, I said, my voice softer than I intended. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that made the parking lot lights seem to glow a little brighter. Can I call you tomorrow? Yes, I said, without a moment's hesitation. As I drove home, the streets of my familiar suburban town felt different, filled with a new and shimmering possibility. Vanessa had tried to script my humiliation, to cast me as the tragic, lonely spinster in her grand performance. But she had failed. Instead, by banishing me to the margins, she had inadvertently pushed me into the path of someone who saw me for who I was. I had walked into that wedding as Vanessa's little sister. I was walking out as the beginning of my own story, and for the first time in a long, long while, I felt completely and utterly free. The drive home from the wedding was surreal. The familiar streets of my quiet suburb, usually a source of comfort, now felt charged with a new, fragile energy. The music on the radio was too loud, the world outside my car window too bright. I replayed every moment with James in my head, his laugh, the way he'd listened, the warmth of his hand on my back. It felt like a beautiful, impossible dream. My phone buzzed softly on the passenger seat. A new message from a number I didn't recognize. James, it's James. Just wanted to make sure you got home safe, and to say, I really am looking forward to calling you tomorrow. Jay. A genuine, unforced smile spread across my face. It was real. He was real. The dream wasn't over. The next morning, however, a familiar anxiety began to creep in. The warm glow of the night before was replaced by the cold, harsh light of day. What if he changes his mind? My inner critic whispered. What if last night was just fun? A game to him? He's an architect from Chicago. He's charming and handsome and exciting. You're a second-grade teacher from New Jersey. What could he possibly see in you? These were the ghosts of my past relationships whispering. Ben, who had found me boring. Tom, who had faded away after I expressed wanting something more serious. They had all been drawn to Vanessa's sparkle, and I was the quiet, practical consolation prize. Was James just another one of them, caught up in the moment of rebellion, before he inevitably returned to a world that valued her kind of vibrant extroversion over my quiet depth? The phone buzzed again. James. Morning, Emily. Hope you're not nursing a wedding hangover. I was thinking, there's a little place in Hoboken right by the water. Great coffee, even better pastries. If you're free this afternoon? The simple, thoughtful invitation was a balm. He wasn't suggesting a fancy dinner in the city. He was suggesting coffee. He was suggesting us. My anxiety warred with the hope his message sparked. I took a deep breath and typed back. Me. Coffee sounds perfect. 2 p.m. The date was a revelation. We sat at a small outdoor table, the autumn sun warm on our faces. James didn't try to be the charming architect from the wedding. He was just James. He asked about my week, about a particularly funny story involving one of my students named Leo, who insisted he was secretly a ninja. He listened to my answer with a focused intensity that made me feel like my life was inherently interesting. He told me about a project he was working on, a new public library branch in a struggling neighborhood. It's about creating a space, he explained, his hands moving as he sketched an idea in the air. A space where everyone, no matter who they are, feels like they belong, where they can find a story that's theirs. He looked at me then, his eyes serious. Kind of like what you did last night, Emily. You took a space that was designed to make you feel small, and you made it your own. His words struck me with the force of a revelation. He wasn't just talking about the wedding table. He was talking about my entire life. For so long, I had shrunk myself to fit into the spaces Vanessa had carved out for me. And last night, without even realizing it, I had finally stopped shrinking. The conversation flowed so easily that hours passed in what felt like minutes. As we walked back to our cars, James stopped me. Emily, he said, said, his voice soft. I know this is all moving fast, but I don't want to hide it. I really like you. A lot. More than I should, probably, considering we just met. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The warmth in his eyes was genuine. The slight nervousness in his smile was endearing. He wasn't playing a part. He was just a man, being honest with a woman he was attracted to, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that I was worthy of that attraction. I like you too, James, I said, the words feeling right and true. More than I should, probably. The next few weeks became a beautiful, easy rhythm. He called every night. We went on more dates, long walks along the Hudson River, exploring little bookshops in the city, a rainy afternoon spent watching old movies. He came to my classroom one afternoon to pick me up, and the way my second graders had swarmed him, asking him if he was the prince from the story, had made my heart swell. He fit into my life in a way no one ever had, but the ghost of Vanessa wasn't entirely gone. A week after our coffee date, I received a text from my mother. Mom, Vanessa called. She seemed very upset. She said you've been spending a lot of time with that man from the wedding. She's worried you're rushing into something, Emily. Just be careful. You know how these things can end. The message was a familiar weapon. Concern disguised as control. It was Vanessa's voice, using my mother as a messenger. For a moment, the old insecurities flared, but then I remembered James's words, a space where everyone feels like they belong. I didn't reply to my mother. Instead, I called James. Hey, he answered, his voice warm. Hey, I said, taking a breath. My mom just texted. Vanessa apparently called her. She's worried about me. There was a pause on his end. Ah, he said, his tone understanding. The sequel. Yeah, I laughed, a little humorlessly. It's hard to shake the feeling that I'm not enough, that they're all waiting for me to mess this up. Emily, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Look at me. Last night when I was telling you about the library project, what did I say about the space? I thought for a second that you wanted everyone to feel like they belonged. Exactly, he said. And you, Emily Reed, are the most belonging person I've ever met. You don't need to earn it. You already have it. The only person who gets to decide if you're enough is you. And from where I'm standing, you're more than enough. You're everything. His words were the anchor I needed. They were a direct counterattack to the poison Vanessa had been feeding me my entire life. That weekend, we drove up to the Berkshires. It was a spontaneous trip, an escape. We hiked through fiery forests, ate at a cozy inn, and sat by a fireplace, talking for hours about everything and nothing. It was there, surrounded by the crisp autumn air and James's unwavering presence, that I finally understood. I was done living in Vanessa's shadow. I was done letting her script my life. The final confrontation happened a few weeks later, over coffee at my parents' house. Vanessa and Mark were visiting, and she couldn't resist bringing it up. So, she began, swirling her latte with a pointed look. I hear you and the architect are still seeing each other. Mark said he's a nice enough fellow, but really, he lives in Chicago. Are you sure this isn't just a rebound phase? A distraction? I looked at her across the polished wooden table. My mother was in the kitchen, pretending not to listen. My father was reading the paper, pointedly engrossed. This was our family dynamic. Vanessa performing, everyone else either watching or ignoring. I set my coffee cup down with a soft click. It's not a distraction, Vanessa, I said, my voice calm and clear. It's real, and it's wonderful. Her smile was tight. Wonderful. Emily, be realistic. He's leaving in 2 months. This is just a fling. I know, I said, meeting her gaze without flinching. And I'm going to go with him. The words hung in the air, shocking even me, but they felt right. They felt powerful. They were a declaration of independence. What? She sputtered, her composure finally cracking. You can't just leave your job, your life. I'm not leaving my life, Vanessa, I corrected her gently. I'm finally starting it. For years, you've treated me like a background character in your story. You've decided I wasn't pretty enough, or exciting enough, or successful enough, but you were wrong. I'm a teacher who loves her students. I'm a woman who dreams of Florence, and I'm a person who is worthy of love and happiness, even if it doesn't look exactly like yours. I stood up, the decision made, the fear gone. I'm going to Chicago with James, and I'm going to see where it leads, because for the first time, Emily Reed is the one writing her own story, and I'm not going to apologize for it. I walked out of the living room, leaving Vanessa staring after me, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. I didn't look back. I walked out of my parents' house, and for the first time in my life, I was walking toward my own future. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was just a beginning, but it was mine, and that was more than enough. The first year in Chicago was a mosaic of quiet revolutions. I rented a sun-drenched studio apartment in Wicker Park, its exposed brick walls and towering windows feeling less like a temporary stopgap and more like a foundation. Teaching at a diverse public school in Logan Square was its own kind of homecoming. My students weren't just faces in a crowd. They were artists, engineers, storytellers, waiting for their blueprints to be drawn. I found myself staying late, not out of obligation, but because the work filled me in a way nothing ever had. James and I fell into a rhythm that felt less like a fairy tale and more like a collaboration. He'd sketch over coffee in the mornings while I graded papers, his charcoal smudges mingling with the scent of roasted beans. We argued over whether a kitchen island should be marble or quartz, debated the merits merits of brutalist architecture versus Art Deco and navigated the mundane, laundry days, leaky faucets, the existential dread of assembling IKEA furniture. But through it all, there was an unspoken understanding. We were building something real. One rainy Tuesday, he came home early, his hair damp and his eyes bright. "I have news," he said, shaking water from his coat. "The library project, it's greenlit." He pulled out a rolled-up blueprint, his fingers tracing the clean lines of the design. "We're breaking ground in the spring." I stared at the drawing, not just at the building, but at the heart of it. A children's wing, a community garden, a quiet reading nook with floor-to-ceiling windows. "James, it's beautiful," I whispered, my throat tight. He looked at me, his expression softening. "It's not just about buildings, Em. It's about creating spaces for people to belong, like you did for me." The moment stretched, charged with a vulnerability that transcended words. Later, as we lay tangled in sheets, he said, "I'm falling in love with you, Emily Reed." Slowly, deliberately, like laying a cornerstone. I didn't answer with words. I kissed him, my hands tangling in his hair, my heart a compass pointing true north. For the first time, I didn't fear the future. I craved it. The letter, Vanessa's letter, arrived in a cream-colored envelope, her looping script a stark contrast to the clean lines of Chicago. I opened it over breakfast, the scent of her jasmine perfume still clinging to the paper. "Dearest Emily, I won't pretend to understand your choices. Leaving your job, your family, for a man you barely knew, it reeks of impulsiveness. But Mark and I talked, and we've decided to give you the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps this is your phase. But remember, life isn't a novel. You can't just rewrite the past. You'll come back to New Jersey. You'll see." I folded the letter, the paper crisp and unforgiving. The old Emily might have felt a sting of guilt, a flicker of doubt. But now, I felt nothing but pity. Vanessa still saw life as a script she'd written, with her as the protagonist and everyone else as supporting characters. She couldn't fathom that I'd written my own. That weekend, James and I drove to Michigan. We stood on the shores of Lake Superior, the water a vast, indifferent gray, the wind whipping our hair into tangles. "She still thinks she's the director," I said, watching a gull dive for fish. James wrapped his arms around me, his chin resting on my crown. "Let her. The best revenge is living so well they become irrelevant." He was right. I didn't need to fight Vanessa anymore. I had outgrown her. The unveiling months later, I stood in a cavernous construction site, hard hat perched on my head, dust coating my boots. The library was skeletal, steel beams like ribs, concrete pillars like vertebrae. James led me to a central wall where a plaque was mounted, still wrapped in canvas. "Ready?" he asked, his grin infectious. Together, we pulled back the cloth. Engraved in the stone was a quote, "A book is a dream that you hold in your hand." Neil Gaiman. But below it, in smaller, elegant script, were two names, designed by James Carter, inspired by Emily Reed. Tears pricked my eyes, not of sadness, but of awe. He hadn't just built a library, he'd built a monument to us, to the woman who'd sat at table 12 and refused to be broken. Later, as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of tangerine and violet, James took my hand. "I have one more thing," he said, leading me to a small walled garden at the library's edge. In the center stood a bronze bench. On the back, a single word was etched, belonging. He squeezed my hand. "This is our spot, for when the world feels too loud." I leaned against him, the city lights sprawling below us like constellations. I thought of Vanessa's letter, of her belief that I'd come back, but I wasn't coming back anywhere. I was here. I was found. I was home.